name. Just like Christianity is convinced that there's a bunch of nuts that are giving Christianity a bad name, right? You can't paint all of them with the same brush. And I would think that even if there are some nutty atheists out there, not that these people are, but if there were, that people would be able to see that it does, no one person speaks for the whole group.
Behind him, but
okay.
You can pick out names, by the way.
Suppose you do win in Chicago and the Supreme Court is necessary, or if necessary. Couldn't Obama and other presidents still proclaim National Days of Prayer even if a law didn't require them to do so?
No, they can't, because a federal decision is enjoining them from doing that. A National Day of Prayer, if we win, would say you cannot do that. Congress has the power, and the courts, as a check, have the power to restrict something that the government can do. Obama can get up as a private person and in any of his speeches say something like, as an individual, I think prayer is wonderful and God bless the United States of America. We all know that that's not government speech. It does seem kind of crossing the line, but that's private speech. We're not going to sue a president who ends a speech with God bless the United States, because we realize that's personal choice of words. But an actual congressional statute that requires the executive branch to proclaim a day of prayer calling all Americans to pray, that's what we have won over. Yeah, and the president could go to church and be seen going to church, and the president as an individual could say, I think Christianity is wonderful, or Islam is wonderful, or whatever. And we can see, most of us can see the distinction between free speech and government speech. So our lawsuit would prohibit another a formal National Day of Prayer. Sometimes there were historically some one-off proclamations, like during tragedy or wartime. Even Madison was pressured to proclaim a day of prayer, or whatever it was called, day of humiliation or something. And later he regretted it. But there was so much pressure put on him during wartime to do this thing. And so he bowed and he said, okay, let's do it. But he and Jefferson said, you know, that's not our business. We're not religious leaders. We're not, you know, what are we doing? It's wrong. We are only empowered to do the job that the Constitution gives us to do. That's all we're empowered to do. And to follow any statutes that Congress tells us to do. So the National Day of Prayer is a congressional statute, a congressional law that makes it unconstitutional. But I suppose if there were another George Bush in office, he or she, Georgette Bush, would find some way to, you know, insinuate their religion into their public life.
In the 50s, we caused all these God we trusted and we feared him laws. We're fighting the godless communists. Now we're fighting the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. So shouldn't we have some sort of movement from our side saying now we're fighting people who have God on their side? Can we demonstrate that we're a secular society? Is there anyone talking about this?
Well, in the polling place, we are about 15% of the country, right? Which is huge. It's big, but as far as numbers go, non-believers are still a minority. However, our minority is growing fast. In fact, it's growing faster than any other group. Right now, the fastest growing religion in the U.S. is non-religion. It's pretty cool. And your generation, you people, you students, are the least religious in the whole country. About 25% of this age group of college age to 20-somethings are non-religious. And in some parts of the country, it's 30 or 40%, which is really a big change. And you're hitting the voting booths now. Some of you are voting for the first time. And probably politicians and scholars aren't going to see the effect of your voting for another decade or so. They're going to start saying, oh, the country is different. Oh, maybe we don't have to pay so much attention to these religious right people. Maybe there's another population out there. So it's a neat change that's happening. And maybe historically we'll be looking back at your generation as the turning of the corner, you know. And you might be like the first secular generation where things, or maybe there's a tipping point that's going to happen. I don't know. Something happened in Europe, right? Nobody made it happen, but Europe just kind of all of a sudden shows up as totally secular. It wasn't because I went over and preached at them. It wasn't because, you know, it was just the people themselves growing organically. So that's what's happening here, and I think it's kind of nice. So yeah, you have a good point, but I think we're a little ways off from that yet. Yeah, in the back, the young guy with the gray.
When the court dismisses your lawsuit for lack of standing, do they define the threshold for you to achieve something?
Yeah, they do. There's these tests. They do, in the case, the Hine decision that we lost on standing, by the way, everybody was on our side. The ACLU sent a great friend of the court brief for us, so did Americans United, so did CFI, so did a bunch of scholars, and so did a bunch of historians, and so did all the major newspapers editorialized in our favor. And so the standing issue was, it's a little complicated, but you can't generally sue the executive branch over, suppose you don't like what copy machine they bought or what country they invaded, or what, you can't usually do that. But there is a narrow exception that's been carved into the law coming out of a decision called Flass versus Cohen, which does allow taxpayers to sue the executive branch through the congressional taxing. That we're taxpayers and Congress has appropriated some of our tax money to do this, then you would have standing to sue. So that's how we were getting in to try to sue Bush, as taxpayers through money. But what happened was that the money that Bush was spending wasn't actually specifically allocated by Congress. Bush was asking for the money, and Congress knew Bush was asking for the money to set up the faith-based initiative. He never got it from them. But so instead he took a chunk of his general appropriation. He took that money and he just on his own decided by his own discretion, I'm going to take some of my money and set up the office as faith-based initiative. So that was a congressional appropriation to the president that was not specifically to do that. And so because of that, the lower court said we didn't have standing. Chicago said we did, because how else can you get at it? How else can you challenge a violation? And can the president just get away with anything? And Judge Posner in Chicago said, you know, what's to keep the president from building a mosque in D.C. in order to try to have international relations with Islam? And so that's how we got overturned in Chicago. But the Supreme Court flipped it around again and said, well, since there was no exact nexus, I couldn't trace one of my tax dollars through Congress through an appropriation that went to the White House to actually tell the White House to do this.
Yeah, but where else would the money come?
Yeah, I know it. And Congress even knew that that money was being used for that. And our decision made that point. Bush was asking for it, Congress knew it, and Congress said, well, you can have it this way. Although there wasn't any named wording that said he could do that. So it was a joke. The whole thing was a big sham because, in fact, some of the justices even said, what Bush is doing might be unconstitutional, but you can't get at it that way. So what they did say is, there either has to be a direct legislative connection in some way, which means we can take other lawsuits. Like in certain states, their legislature appropriated money for this Jesus God pod in the prison system, right? Well, there you go. We have a connection. We can go after it because that connection is there. Or if you have somebody at this end of it who has direct injury, a prisoner in that program, there's a direct injury there. And the third option is the legislature can actually tell the executive not to spend the money. There's a political solution too. That chance of that happening right now. But I mean, our Congress could tell the president, don't spend money in the faith-based initiative. And that would be us asking our members of Congress to do that, putting pressure on it. So that means ever since the Hine decision, we can still go to court, but the bar has been raised to get into court. And ever since that issue became public, it's a bit of an embarrassment to us, although it wasn't just our group, all the groups were on our side on this thing. It's a little bit of an embarrassment that our lawsuit now has raised the bar to standing. And now all these other lawsuits that are happening, everybody's raising standing. Let's keep them out of court. Let's keep these troublemakers out of the system. So we have to be a lot more careful. We have to be a little more selective in what cases we do take. So
when the court decided that, was it like a 5-4 thing, or did they even have to tell you?
No, it's 5-4, yeah. They published a decision. 2 of the 5, Scalia and Thomas, thought that we should completely undo the Flass decision, totally. And 3 of the 5 that ruled against us disagreed on that. And then 4 of the 9 wrote a great dissent in our favor, saying that this logic is just, it's illogical. It's stupid, right? And if you read their dissent, it makes a lot of sense. So at least we have the consolation that 4 U.S. Supreme Court justices agree with us on this. And that their 4 was actually the plurality position. Because the 5 were divided into 2 and 3, right? So we actually had 4 on our side, but 5 against us on the standing issue. So, and our website, you can go read the whole history, all the briefs, all the decisions that every